Hey there, it is Saturday, so it's movie night, and I'm here to present another quarantine quadruple feature. My name is Paul, and I just finished my 28th week of quarantine. A few news developments this week. The grand jury has finally made a decision in the case of the murder of Breonna Taylor by these three police officers. Only one officer was indicted, and it wasn't for the murder of this young black woman asleep in her bed, which of course prompted outrage and more protests. Also, the government has been dragging its feet for weeks and weeks to pass any further sort of stimulus plan for the millions of Americans that are out of work. No compromises can come there, but right as a Supreme Court justice seat needs to be filled, they're all scrambling to make that happen immediately. So that should show you where the interests of our government lie, and it is not with you or the citizens of this country or making sure people aren't getting evicted or going hungry or having all kinds of horrible things happen to them in this catastrophic time. So things kind of continue to be as bleak as ever. Hopefully there is some hope on the horizon, but I guess we'll see as this election nears closer and closer. But we have a suitably dark topic today. I kind of want to talk about the news and how the news portrays things and how essentially the news kind of created the monstrous version of Donald Trump that we have now. Because when Trump first announced that he was running for president, it was a joke and it was covered as a joke, but he was getting nonstop coverage because it started getting ratings. Because every time he opens his mouth, something ridiculous and offensive and stupid comes out, and they keep the cameras rolling because they never know what he's going to say. So this guy is a ratings bonanza for all of these news outlets. More people are watching the news because we just sit there and we get more and more furious, and then we keep watching just to see the dumbass thing he says next, stupefied at how ridiculous some of the things coming out of his mouth are. The media is essentially responsible for this by constantly giving him the media spotlight. If he wasn't getting constant coverage back in 2015 and 2016, he probably wouldn't have won the election. So it's kind of funny that he turns around and he just says fake news all the time. He should be fucking thanking the news. What we choose to highlight in the news, it's a huge problem for this country. And I mean, we're falling into that cycle again. But also the media is not going to stop because the media is doing better than it ever has because of him. So I'm sure the heads of some of these news outlets are thrilled at the prospect of getting 4 more years of this, or, if Trump has his way, 8 more years or 12 more years, or he's going to eliminate democracy completely so that he can just sit in the White House being a fucking idiot eating McDonald's. But anyways, we're talking about news today. Now, we're not talking about journalism per se. We're not talking about newspapers or print articles. Today, we're focusing strictly on the news that you watch. We're going to be looking at the dark side of the news. And we have 4 movies, of course, that we're going to be recommending and discussing and watching. But there's a few others that I want to talk about. Oh, first of all, while we're talking about the fucking media and how toxic it is, I'm in this month's edition of Reader's Digest. I have a story in the October issue, so go pick that up and support Reader's Digest, I guess. Okay, the first movie that I'm going to talk about, it's about the media, but it's not about the news. And I don't have a proper case for this, but A Face in the Crowd by Elia Kazan with a screenplay by Bud Schulberg. Now, this movie is spectacular. 1957 is when this film came out. Elia Kazan had a very interesting career, a very respected filmmaker who earlier in his life, had gotten a little interested in communism. Senator Joseph McCarthy was a Republican senator from the late 40s until the late 50s when he passed away. But in 1950, they started the McCarthy trials, where people were being accused of communism, and they were questioned in front of this big panel of folks, and they were broadcast on the news, and they were reporting on all of these people who might be communists infiltrating the country, that are trying to crumble our democracy, because we were in the midst of the Cold War at that point, and that was everyone's biggest fear at the time. So Elia Kazan was questioned in one of these trials for a really long time. And at first he didn't say anything, but then he was over it, and he was disenchanted with communism at that point as well. He wasn't a practicing communist. It was just something he was kind of showing an interest in. And then he realized that form of government was just as fucked as all the others, and it wasn't really going to make a difference either way. So he wasn't in favor of communism or anything like that. So he didn't have any loyalties to that movement. So eventually he did say, yes, I was interested in the Communist Party, and then he named names. And that was what they did at these trials, is they would question you, and then they would get names of all of the other people that were at these communist meetings as well, and other people that you knew were communists. And it was big on infiltrating Hollywood. And it was very much like the Salem witch trials. In fact, the Crucible is about the McCarthy trials, because anyone that would speak out against Senator McCarthy would then suddenly, within a few days, they're being accused. He would have their name on a piece of paper. So it was very much like a, don't you dare criticize, because then you're going to be one of the bad guys. So Elia Kazan, he named like 8 names, I think, but they were names they already had, so he wasn't really selling anyone out. But that really put a blotch on his career, and he was very frustrated with people in Hollywood for turning their backs on him, and he was frustrated with our government as well. So the next few movies he made were actually about the McCarthy trials. So he made On the Waterfront, starring Marlon Brando, which was an indictment of that, and then especially A Face in the Crowd. And the screenwriter, Bud Schulberg, was actually questioned for, his ties to the Communist Party as well. So both of them were like, fuck everyone, like, let's make a movie more or less about it. So A Face in the Crowd stars Andy Griffith from the Andy Griffith Show, right? Like fun-loving police detective, in his first starring role in a film. And he plays totally opposite of Andy Griffith that we see in the show. There's a woman who's running sort of an NPR type show where she just goes and interviews random people off the street. She goes into holding cells for jails and interviews people, and her show's called A Face in the Crowd. And she's basically just discovering the side of America that we don't really see reported on that often. And it's just the vehicle to give people whose voices we don't normally hear a chance to have their voices recognized. So she finds Lonesome Rhodes in a jail. He's in a holding cell for being drunk the night before, and she just lets her tape recorder record, and he plays some blues music, and he just rambles, and he's a hit. The radio gets really great ratings because of that. People are writing in and they want to hear more from Lonesome Rhodes. So then he gets brought on to this radio station, and he eventually gets his own sort of talk show where he just rambles aimlessly and he says outrageous shit. It gets the public's attention and everyone's listening to him. So he keeps throughout the movie getting a bigger and bigger platform to spew his nonsense. And unlike a figure like Trump, the nonsense he's spewing, that he's kind of pulling out of his ass as he goes along, it's usually positive. It's usually inspiring people and showing, look, you can build yourself from the ground up. But what people don't know is that he's actually a huge dickhead. He's really mean, he's really toxic, and he views his adoring public kind of as pawns just to make him more money. So he doesn't actually care about anyone. So he's a very toxic individual who is sort of infecting everyone that he works with. And eventually, his TV show that he has is so big that he's not only like a tastemaker for products, he also becomes like a kingmaker for politicians. And he's trying to get this governor or someone elected president so that he can essentially be puppet mastering the person that he wants elected as president. So it's the rise and fall of this wild character, Lonesome Rhodes, and the movie is really fantastic. But that's why I kind of delve into that whole history of McCarthyism, is because this movie is kind of inadvertently touching on a lot of these topics, because Lonesome Rhodes was a very much like a McCarthy type figure, and if you spoke out against him, told him you didn't like what you were doing, suddenly in the next episode he's lambasting you to his public, and then your career is over. So he is able to kind of a character assassinate anyone he wants in that show. And the next movie I'm actually going to talk about is about the McCarthy trials as well. And this movie, I'm not really recommending in line with all of these other films that I'm recommending, because this one's not really about the dark side of the media. This one is actually about the media kind of in the integrity that comes with it sometimes. But Good Night and Good Luck is about Edward R. Murrow, who was one of the first news broadcasters to actually speak out about Joseph McCarthy, and then all of the kind of ensuing backlash from that, of then being accused of being a communist as well because he dared speak out against this powerful senator. But the movie's not really about the dark side of the news. This is kind of one of those rare media movies that's like, oh, look how great the news can be when it's in the hands of capable journalists who are willing to say the right thing at the expense of their own careers, potentially. So that one's kind of about that as well. Okay, enough about communism and McCarthyism. I'm going to talk about one more movie really quick that I offhandedly recommend as far as the media goes. This one might be kind of a funny recommendation. But Anchorman, I feel, is actually a kind of a scathing satire of the sexism inherent in the media. And this movie's actually become a lot more relevant in the past few years with prominent journalists and newscasters having their downfall in light of the Me Too movement and the way that they've been treating women in their careers. The newscasters in Anchorman are very much a representation of the sexist mindset that is inherent, apparently, in a lot of these news organizations. And Jay Roach's movie Bombshell kind of covers that as well. Bombshell is kind of all about sexism and sexual assault in the world of the media. This one's at Fox News, so no surprise there. But okay, let's talk about the 4 movies that we're going to watch for the dark side of the news. The first movie, I'm sure you already know what it's going to be. Absolute masterpiece from Sidney Lumet, Paddy Chayefsky's Network. I'd say the word that is most often associated with Network is prophetic. This movie came out in 1976, before news networks are what they are today, which are these big mass entertainment centers, right? They're there to entertain us more so than they are to give an unbiased, justified opinion on things that we should know more about. It's more about keeping us watching no matter what happens. They're going to show you outrageous stuff. They're going to show you car crashes. They're going to show you people getting killed on screen. They're going to show you really outlandish shit on the news just so that you don't turn away. This movie predicted all of that. Prior to the 70s, the news wasn't really like that. It was simpler. It wasn't entertaining. It wasn't flashy. Paddy Chayefsky was looking at, I think it was ABC. He was looking at a news program that was being bought by a big entertainment company. And he thought they're going to start turning news more into entertainment. And that's exactly what Network is about. It's about a news network that is trying to get the highest ratings by any means necessary. Howard Beale is who this movie's about. He just speaks his mind, and he goes on these really incredible rants all about being fed up with what the media is feeding us, and it's like toxic spiral that society is in. And they start putting him live on air because he's getting ratings. If you ever heard the phrase, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore," that is the most famous line from the movie, and it comes from one of his rants. And he says, if you're sick of this, if you're sick of that, go to your windows, open your windows, lean your head out, say, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." And he's just going on this crazy diatribe, and everyone watching the news is kind of like, yeah, fuck yeah. Yeah, hell yeah. And then like someone goes out to like open the window and see if anyone's doing it, and they just fucking shouting it. So the whole city is like shouting it from those windows, and that's the beginning of Howard Beale's rise to power in Network. Kind of a similar trajectory as Andy Griffith in A Face in the Crowd, but Howard Beale's not a bad character. His heart is absolutely in the right place. So he gets a bigger and bigger platforms for speaking his mind on any rant that he wants to go on. But then the network is realizing that the rants he's going on are actually making a difference in society, and people are agreeing with him. And then they decide they can't have him saying these disparaging remarks about the news and about media on the air anymore, and they need to figure out a way to make it stop. So it's definitely a satire on media, especially news, but it is a brilliant one. It's really dark. It's very funny. Howard Beale was played by Peter Finch, who actually had a heart attack on the press tour for the movie. So they finished filming, and they were traveling around a lot, and they were giving tons of interviews, and they didn't know that Peter Finch had a bad heart, and he died. And so he went on to actually win the Academy Award for Best Actor. And he's the first person to ever win an Academy Award posthumously after he passed away. Faye Dunaway also won Best Actress. It won Best Screenplay. Sidney Lumet did not win Best Director. In fact, I think he was nominated 6 times in his career. Dog Day Afternoon, Network. the fuck else was he nominated for? 12 Angry Men and a few others, and he never won. So he's one of the great filmmakers to never win an Academy Award. But Network, super entertaining and sort of alarming about how many of the predictions in this movie actually came to fruition. And when we look at where we're at now, today, with so much to blame on the news for getting us here, we shouldn't really be surprised because, you know, we've had movies and stories kind of giving us this warning for a really long time. But Network, absolutely brilliant movie. You need to see that one. Oh, another cool thing that Network does is it has a narrator. You never see them. It's just a voice that's narrating. It's sort of this otherworldly narration that's not very common in movies, but it helps us kind of separate reality from the reality of this movie. Like, we know it's a satire. We know it's kind of set in this alternate reality, and the narration does a really cool job of helping that out. So Network, Sidney Lumet's masterpiece from 1976. Movie number 2. I should mention, none of these movies are subtle. All of them hammer these messages home hard, and this one is no exception. Oliver Stone's gonzo masterpiece, Natural Born Killers. Natural Born Killers is noteworthy for a few reasons. It's a really wild movie, and Oliver Stone, he mixes formats in just a very jarring way. Like, he'll shoot on different cameras, and not just like, you know, slightly different film cameras. He'll change film stocks completely. He'll shoot on video. He cuts from black and white to color, and he does this really interesting form of cutting. And if you listen to his movies with director's commentary, I forget which one I was listening to. It might have been Natural Born Killers. It might have been Nixon, but he talks about this style that he developed where it cuts from color to black and white in a scene, and the character's doing something a little bit different. Like, he could just be sitting there smiling, and then it cuts to him like going crazy in a black and white shot. And the way he interprets this style of cutting and filming that he sort of developed over a series of about 4 or 5 films that he was doing this, is that the black and white shots are their thoughts. That's their thought process. That's how they're feeling. And the color shots are how they're showing it to you, how it would just be presented in kind of a normal standard narrative film. But he's kind of showing you their interiors. He never explains that's exactly what it is, but that's what he does when he's cutting in this very erratic and bizarre style that you won't see in any other film. So he's a very bold filmmaker, and he was doing some really experimental stuff with Natural Born Killers. Natural Born Killers is also noteworthy for Juliette Lewitt's absolutely terrifying performance of Mallory Knox, and Woody Harrelson's kind of career-shifting performance as Mickey Knox. Woody Harrelson was such a bold choice because everyone knew him as kind of the dopey, lovable guy in Cheers. He was like comedic relief. He was kind of stupid, but he's not an actor you would expect to be like a scary dude. I think the biggest role he'd had before this cinematically was White Men Can't Jump, which is a good movie, but you're not going to look at that and be like, yeah, he can pull off scary. He's absolutely terrifying in this movie. It's about a couple that falls in love, and they go on a crazy murder rampage all across America. And they're given more fame and notoriety by the media that is presenting them almost as folk heroes. So the country starts really getting in on this journey and hoisting Mickey and Mallory Knox onto a heroic pedestal almost. They become heroes to the country. Even though they're maniacs, they're fucking murderers, they're killing people, but they become heroes because of the media. Oliver Stone really hammers that message home. In fact, there's a review, it's like one of my favorite movie reviews, that says Oliver's form of subtlety is like putting a satin Crown Royale bag over the hammer before he smashes you in the face with it, or something like that. But I thought that was pretty funny. But I love Natural Born Killers, and this one's really divisive, right down the line. People either love this movie or hate it. When I saw this movie, I was in elementary school. I think it came out in 1994. I was 10 or 11 years old when I saw it. My brother came home with the double VHS from the video store, and he rented Natural Born Killers and Larry Clark's Kids. And I watched those 2 movies that just fucked me up. And Natural Born Killers, I thought, was very scary and really made me think. I mean, this is, you know, symbolism and messages for junior high school kids. Adults might find it a bit eye-rolling and heavy-handed with the way that it presents the media, the way that it presents penal colonies. All of it's kind of showing all of the flaws that are inherent in all of those systems, but it does it in such an entertaining way that I just forgive how obvious it is. The other reason that Natural Born Killers is like very famous and noteworthy is because it was from a Quentin Tarantino script. And Oliver Stone changed the script around so much, which people are like, you don't change around a Tarantino script. But he wasn't Tarantino at that point. He wasn't the Tarantino we know and love. He was in Tarantino who had written a few movies and had like one movie come out and another movie was coming out kind of parallel with Natural Born Killers. It was the same year that Pulp Fiction came out. It was a screenplay that Oliver Stone had bought. And you can actually read Quentin Tarantino's kind of unabridged, untouched screenplay, and it's really good. The movie's really good too. What Oliver Stone does with it, he does really cool stuff. And Quentin Tarantino, actually, he had written like this massive screenplay, which kind of included elements of Natural Born Killers and True Romance and some elements from Reservoir Dogs, and then he kind of cannibalized all of those screenplays and made it 3 different stories instead of one humongous, I don't even know how it would work together, epic screenplay. Quentin Tarantino was so unhappy with Oliver Stone's bastardization of his script that he took his name off the movie as written by Quentin Tarantino, and he only allowed himself to have a story by credit because I think the studio pushed for him not to remove his name entirely. So he has a story by credit on Natural Born Killers, but he claims he's never seen the movie, which I don't know if I fully believe that. He hates the movie, almost to the level of like Stephen King hating the Kubrick version of The Shining. That's like, it seems like that's how much Quentin Tarantino hates Natural Born Killers. But Tarantino, he like cannibalized one big script to make 3 scripts. He's kind of famous for doing that. He takes stuff from everywhere. He was really criticized a lot by like people in his earlier years by hearing something they said and then it would appear in one of his screenplays. But that's the risk you run when you befriend a writer and like talk a lot to them. But he did that when he wrote From Dusk Till Dawn. He had the Ezekiel 25:17 speech from Pulp Fiction that was originally in From Dusk Till Dawn, and then the production of From Dusk Till Dawn got delayed and delayed and delayed, and then he started pulling things from the From Dusk Till Dawn script and putting it into the script he was working on, which was Pulp Fiction. But so yeah, he kind of cannibalizes his own stuff as well. Now my favorite anecdote about Natural Born Killers is that there was someone on the crew, like an associate producer or a production designer or something like that, who had promised a local boot company that they would have their product featured in the movie. And they kind of came to an agreement where they would show this local boot emporium's truck in one of the shots. But this agreement was made behind Oliver Stone's back. He didn't know about it. So one morning, they spent all morning, Oliver Stone and the crew and the cinematographer, setting up a really beautiful establishing shot of this house. When they're nearing the end of getting ready to set up and film this shot, the boot truck shows up. And the person kind of sheepishly goes over to Oliver Stone to ask if the truck can appear in the shot. And they're very nervous because he's an artist and he's not going to want to compromise his artistic vision by sticking product placement right in the shot. So the producer or whoever it was walks over and they're like, you know, Mr. Stone, we've made an agreement with this local boot company to feature their truck in one of our shots and they're here. Can we put them in this establishing shot? And Oliver Stone's like, why the fuck would I do that? And the person is like, oh, well, they said they'll give everyone on the casting crew a free pair of boots. And Oliver Stone was like, hell yeah, get that truck in the shot. So they stuck the boot truck in the shot, and the next day, everyone on set was walking around in their brand new boots furnished by the Boot Emporium or whatever the company was called. Okay, movie number 3. So we went from 1976, jumped up to 1994, and now we're going to jump up to the aughts, 2012? No, I don't know. What the fuck year did this come out? 2012, 2013, Tony Gilroy's Nightcrawler, starring Jake Gyllenhaal. Jake Gyllenhaal plays a Nightcrawler, which is a kind of a camera person who goes and records accidents or burglaries or fires. He has they have police scanners in their car and they listen for 911 calls and then they try to beat the cops there so that they can get footage of the accident that's happened so that they can go and sell that footage to the news. So it's a really dark part of news, but I guess, you know, the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads. And his efforts to get the most sensational footage get a little darker and darker as the movie goes, and his way to get that footage becomes increasingly disturbing. Jake Gyllenhaal is, I mean, absolutely should have gotten an Academy Award nomination for this film. He is so scary. I swear to God, I've known a guy who is just like this character. He, you know, smiles and he tells you everything he wants to hear, and he's very charming, and he's a go-getter, and he's learning, but he is just a sociopath, and he doesn't care about anyone, and he is just climbing the ladder in the most vicious, nasty, most passive-aggressive way possible, and sometimes when he doesn't need you anymore, the most aggressive way possible. So he's absolutely phenomenal. It's probably the best performance he's ever given. It's dark, it's scary, it's kind of complex and nuanced. Also stars Rene Russo, and in one of his last roles, in fact, I'd probably say his last noteworthy role, America's Sweetheart, Bill Paxton. He plays a competing Nightcrawler who's more seasoned and professional, and as always, he's awesome in this film, as he was in everything, but I love Bill Paxton. But I love Nightcrawler. It's really dark, it's very strange, it's not really like anything else you've seen, and it certainly portrays a really dark side of the news that we don't see presented in films that often. Okay, movie number 4 for the dark side of the news, Gus Van Sant's To Die For, featuring Nicole Kidman and Joaquin Phoenix. Nicole Kidman is an aspiring news anchor. She's a news anchor, but she wants to kind of climb the ranks as well. And she starts having an affair with a very young guy played by Joaquin Phoenix. Its kind of narrative arc is similar to Natural Born Killers, with the more sensational your story, the more they're going to give it news coverage, even if it's giving news coverage to a toxic individual. So kind of the worse her life gets, the better she thinks it's getting, because the more coverage she's getting. So she plays a very dark, disturbed character who only has her eye on the prize of getting famous or infamous. To her, it doesn't really matter. The story is basically about her seducing this very young guy and trying to convince him to kill her husband, played by Kevin Dillon, that she's having like a bad relationship with, and I'll be with you if only my husband wasn't in the picture type story. That's our 4th movie that we're looking at for the dark side of the news by Gus Van Sant, To Die For. So the 4 movies that we are going to be watching for our quadruple feature for week 28, as we continue consuming more and more news and getting more and more depressed. We're going to start with Sidney Lumet's masterpiece, Network. Highly recommend checking this one out. This is just a great piece of cinema for anyone to watch, really. Oliver Stone's wacko out there murder media movie, Natural Born Killers, starring Woody Harrelson in an amazingly terrifying turn. Tony Gilroy's Nightcrawler, starring the great Jake Gyllenhaal in his best performance. And Gus Van Sant's To Die For, starring Joaquin Phoenix and the incomparable Nicole Kidman. Those are the 4 movies that we're going to be watching. So take a break from the news and go ahead and watch some movies about the news instead. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening. If you've listened this far, I hope you're taking care of yourselves. I hope you're watching great movies, taking care of your mental health however you need to. Get ready to vote. The elections are coming up, and they are more important this year than they've ever been. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.